Dear friends, can we agree that love is core to human flourishing? Can we all agree that love is core to human flourishing? And Jesus says in the gospel today, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So what is this love? I want to briefly argue in this very brief homily that human flourishing requires love, and love requires confronting self-sacrifice. Human flourishing does indeed require love, and love requires confronting self-sacrifice. Because when we know the love of God and what God went through for us to show us the divine heart, his merciful heart of love, we have to confront self-sacrifice. And if we are honest with ourselves in our own relationships, can we acknowledge that none of us has loved our friends, our spouses perfectly? We have to confront self-sacrifice if we are to ascribe love to our actions. Let me take a different tact. For those of you who love hockey, for those of you young folks who are growing up and love playing hockey, I believe that you're going to have to confront self-sacrifice. You got to get up in the morning. Maybe you don't like that alarm clock when it goes off at 5:30 a.m. to go to mass. Go to hockey. You know, you got to confront self-sacrifice in order to get up to achieve your goal of, in this instance, of being good at hockey. When you're in the rink on the ice, you got to dig deep. You got to confront self-sacrifice in order to be good at what you choose. And oh, you Maple Leafs fans, you know self-sacrifice and suffering. And Jesus tells us the greatest and the first commandment is to love God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind. So this now, immediately, Jesus is confronting us with something that is very inconvenient. Many would say, I feel what love is, and I don't need God to know what love is. Okay, very good. Very good, okay. I just want to share with you a couple of stories as your pastor so that you can confront a few things that are going on that I think is relevant to us understanding what love is today. And I think what flows from it is our calling in the midst of this of what are we doing? Why are we gathered around the altar? What are we doing? Why did this dear man come halfway around the world to serve us out of the love of Christ? What's going on here? So let me just walk through this. A couple of true. This is a true story, and they're so over the top for me that I want you to know that I have witnesses. There's not one ounce of exaggeration in any of this. Not that I exaggerate my stories anyway. Anyway, here we go. I want to tell you about this is a true story. There is a widow in our parish who is lonely. And I would say, I'm not a psychologist, but I would say she's probably dealing with a bit of depression. I know for certain she feels lonely. I know with certainty that she feels like she is a burden because she's expressed her loneliness to me. She has expressed to me that she feels like a burden. So when she is not feeling well, she's really not feeling well this one particular day, she calls up a couple of friends of hers who I know well, who are in this parish, they're in this mass today. They call her up and she says, I'm not feeling well, can you come over? So they come over and they validate what she knows. You're not feeling well, what do we do? Well, I don't know what's going on with you, but I think we should call 911. So they call 911 and the paramedics arrived. I want you to know that it was later proven that what she was suffering was a heart attack, okay? So the paramedics arrived. God bless them. I'm so thankful for paramedics. This is not a critique of what the paramedics are doing whatsoever, or any first responders for that matter. So we've got a lonely woman who feels like a burden, who's having a heart attack. paramedics arrive, and in their triage, one of the questions that they ask her is, have you been triaged for MAID? Have you been triaged for medical assistance in dying? Have you been triaged so that a physician can help you die? Why is that relevant to emergent care? Why is that relevant to what is going on in this scenario whatsoever? I ask you, is this love? Is that what love is? Let me tell you another scenario. Early in the summer, early June, if I remember correctly, I was asked, as I am often, to go visit someone in a local seniors home here. All I knew is that the woman was 92 and she was near death. Okay, so I went to see her. I often get these calls, and sometimes it's I walk into a room with family surrounding a dear old person who's near death. Sometimes the person who's in the process of dying is lucid, sometimes they're not. What I walked into this one particular day, all I knew was her name, her room number, and that she was 92. What I walked into, I couldn't believe she was 92. She looked fabulous. She looked like a healthy 72-year-old. She was more cognitively with it than I am at 54. She radiated beauty. I just couldn't believe this beautiful woman who was here. And the reason why she was in the process of dying is that night she was going to be taking the needle to end her life, because, in her words, she was lonely and felt like a burden. These two women were lonely and felt like a burden. Is this what love is? Jesus says, love God with all your heart. This is the greatest and first commandment, and love your neighbor as yourself. Friends, I got a question for you. Do you feel like a burden? Do you feel like a burden? I want you to know deeply in your heart, I want you to know this in your soul, you are not a burden to God. You are a beloved child of God. This is the greatest and first truth from which flows the greatest and first commandment. You are not a burden to God. If you are dealing with depression, you are not a burden. If you are dealing with loneliness, you are not a burden. If you are dealing with addictions, you are not a burden. If you are secretly cutting yourself because of the emotional pain you feel in your heart, you are not a burden. If you're dealing with trauma from your past, you are not a burden. If you are slipping into dementia, my dear brother or sister, I want you to know that you are not a burden. My family, just for the record, is full of Alzheimer's and dementia, and you are not a burden. This is why, as your pastor, you've heard me speak so many times about home communion and communion to people in our seniors' homes, many who are lonely and feel like a burden. They are not a burden. And we are called to speak this truth into their lives. We're called to be witnesses to this truth in their lives. We're called to bring to them the love of God. You're not a burden. That lie is unraveled by the truth of these first two commandments. You are not a burden. This is why I'm so happy that right in our parish we have 3 shelters out back, and the occupants of these shelters get a meal, a home-cooked meal, 7 days a week. 6 days a week, you, members of this parish, provide an evening meal to them. One night of the week, they have a meal down in the hall with a ministry that we call 12 Baskets. It's why I'm so happy to support the St. Vincent de Paul and the wonderful work they do in the community. It's why I'm so honored to support Momentum, a ministry to single mothers, because they are not a burden. They may feel burdened, but they are not a burden. It's why I'm so honored to support the Immigrant Support Committee, who are putting on a reception today afterwards in the hall. Come on down for a coffee and meet people who you typically probably won't meet in the run-of-the-mill of your normal daily coming and going. Come on down afterwards for a reception. And in 2 weeks, on Sunday, November 12th, we'll be having a ministry fair here in the hall. I invite you to come and learn about the various ministries that we have in this parish. that are all geared towards Christian love, of being able to speak in people's lives. You're not a burden. You are a beloved child of God. I want to tell you about, many of you know, I've been away for 2 weeks. And I had such an amazing trip. I went to Medjugorje. I had a fabulous visit to Medjugorje, a beautiful time of prayer. And then I traveled around Italy. I went to some of the most sacred and holy and historic sites in Christianity. And I was so, I just want to give you just one example. Little old me, who's been a priest for such a short period of time, I had the privilege of celebrating the Mass on the altars of some of the great saints in our church. One in particular, St. Padre Pio, where he celebrated the Mass for nearly 50 years. I presided at that same altar. It was overwhelmingly beautiful for me. And if you remember so I arrived home about 2:30 a.m. Sunday morning last week, and at 10 a.m. I was here at the altar with Father Alray. And at the end of the Mass, he turned to me and he said, "Do you have any announcements?" And I said, "No," because I could barely speak. And not because I was tired, but because I was so overwhelmed by the beauty of what I experienced in this space of celebrating the sacred mysteries with you. We are gathered around this altar, participating in eternal things. And yes, I'm glad I went to Italy and experienced that beauty, but it's all happening right now, right here. Eternal things are happening. You are a beloved child of God, and we are called to share this with the world. This is the beginning, the middle, and the end of the Christian reality. The world has gone off its rocker. Inflation, homelessness, war, loneliness, hatred. The world has gone crazy, and we need to speak a word of truth into our own lives. I want to tell you a quick story about St. Francis of Assisi. I was over there, and St. Francis, his father wanted him to take over the family textile business. He came from a very, very wealthy family, but Francis had it on his heart. He was called by Jesus to go serve the poor in Assisi. He wanted to do this with all his heart. His father was embarrassed by his son. "I cannot believe you are turning your back on me, on the wealth, on the family. You're an embarrassment to the family. You, Francis, you're an embarrassment to me. You're an embarrassment to the family." And that's what his father was saying around this village. "You're an embarrassment to me." But Francis knew, because of the Word of God, that he was a beloved child of God, and he learned to work in confidence, learned to live in confidence that he is not an embarrassment. He's a beautiful child of God who's called to serve the poor. And he turned his back on material wealth to do what Jesus was calling him to do. The world has gone crazy, and we need to speak a word of truth into our own lives, because we need this in order to love our neighbor as ourselves, which is the second and great commandment. It presupposes that you know your own true identity and can speak a word of truth into your own life. When you know this truth, that in spite of ourselves, we are beloved children of God, we can learn to live by these two great commandments and flourish as individuals, as a community of faith, of hope, and of love. God bless you.